Hey there, all you theater-loving luminaries. Welcome back to Broadway by Ghostlight. I'm Mark Bonanni, and if you're like me, you not only love the art form of theater, but you love the very theaters themselves. Back in my merch days, I toured the country for over 3 years and got to see some of the most beautiful theaters in the country, from the Fox Theater in St. Louis, to the Rialto Square Theater in Joliet, Illinois, to the Municipal Auditorium in Morganton, North Carolina. But there is no place like Broadway, and that includes all 41 of its theaters. Yes, though many Broadway theaters have been demolished over time, sadly, there are currently 41 Broadway theaters in operation. Now, I would love to do a mini video on each individual theater, so please let me know in the comments if that's something that interests you. I just love talking about the theaters. There's so many fun little details and little history lessons and ghost stories and all sorts of fun things. So let me know in the comments if you want some of that. Tell me! But just to dip my toes into the history of Broadway's temples to the performing arts, I thought I'd do a quick 41 random facts about the 41 Broadway theaters. So let's get to it.
We're wasting precious time. Come on to the theater.
The Al Hirschfeld Theater. When the Al Hirschfeld Theater was built for its original namesake, vaudeville impresario Martin Beck, it was the only theater in New York that was owned outright without a mortgage. There is one small vestige left of the theater's time as the Martin Beck. A no longer in use outside box office window can be seen in front of the theater, over which the name Martin Beck Theater is etched in the wall itself. The Ambassador Theater. Though from the outside the theater looks totally normal, the Ambassador Theater, where the hit revival of Chicago continues to pack 'em in, is actually situated diagonally on its relatively small property to maximize the seating potential, though it does leave much to be desired in backstage area, I'm sure. The August Wilson Theater. The August Wilson Theater was, in a way, responsible for the careers of Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart. The Garrick Gaieties, a benefit revue that thrust the future titans of Broadway into the public spotlight in the 1920s, was originally put on to raise money for new tapestries for the Guild Theater, now called the August Wilson. But sadly, don't look for the tapestries when you go see a show there. They have been lost over time.
Well, that sucks.
The Belasco Theater. The theater's namesake, David Belasco, had a 10-room apartment built into the theater for himself. Styled in an American Gothic theme, he was known as the Bishop of Broadway after all. The duplex above the theater featured an elevator connected to backstage, several offices, an ornate fireplace, and even a grotto. The apartment is abandoned now, unfortunately, and is not in use or available for the public to see. Ugh. I'll get there one day.
Really love to see your apartment before I die.
The Bernard B. Jacobs Theater. The grand vaulted arches in the mezzanine are decorated with two beautiful murals entitled Lovers of Spain by Willie Poggiani. The Booth Theater. The Booth Theater is named after legendary actor Edwin Booth, known as one of the greatest Shakespearean actors of all time. He did have his legacy overshadowed somewhat, though, by his infamous brother, presidential assassin John Wilkes Booth.
You assassin!
The Broadhurst Theater. The Broadhurst Theater is an exact mirror of its neighbor on 45th Street, the Schoenfeld Theater. The Broadway Theater. While several theaters became movie houses at one point in their past, the Broadway Theater started out as a movie house and then became a legitimate theater. It was there that the groundbreaking cartoon Steamboat Willie debuted and introduced the world to Mickey Mouse. The Circle in the Square Theater. The Circle in the Square Theater houses the Circle in the Square Theater School, the only accredited training conservatory associated with a Broadway theater. The Ethel Barrymore Theater. Named for the legendary Ethel Barrymore, whose production of Kingdom of God opened the theater in 1928, the Barrymore was the last theater built before the Great Depression and the last theater built by the Schubert brothers, Lee and J.J. The Eugene O'Neill Theater. The Forest Theater, its original name, was originally planned by the Schuberts as half of a theater/hotel complex, but because of the Depression, the Schuberts could only afford to build the theater. The Gerald Schoenfeld Theater. The Schoenfeld, originally the Plymouth, was architect Herbert J. Krapp's first commission. Okay, get it all out of your system now, children. Herbert J. Krapp was a monumental figure in the shaping of Broadway as we know it today, having designed 15 of the current Broadway theaters and several more that are no longer standing.
I love crap.
The Gershwin Theater. The Gershwin Theater, the largest house on Broadway with 1,933 seats, is also the home to the American Theater Hall of Fame. Should you find yourself seeing the theater's current long-running tenant, Wicked, in the theater's upper lobby you will find the names of the Hall of Fame inductees blazoned on the very walls of the theater itself in gold. You can spot almost every big name in the theater, from Richard Rodgers to Ethel Merman and Tennessee Williams, to Audra McDonald, Marin Mazzie, and Lynn Nottage. There's also some fun props and costumes and artifacts from Broadway history there. I will say though, I've always felt it wasn't right for the only way to visit the Hall of Fame was to have a ticket for Wicked. I think there should be some kind of viewing hours during weekdays or something. Just my 2 cents.
He's absolutely right.
The Helen Hayes Theater. Originally named the Little Theater, the venue lived up to its name with only 300 seats. In the 1920s, it was redesigned to increase the seating and improve acoustics, and the theater now seats 597, making it the smallest theater on Broadway. The Hudson Theater. The Hudson Theater is both Broadway's oldest and its newest theater. It first opened on October 19, 1903, beating the New Amsterdam's opening by 1 week. The theater reopened on February 23, 2017, after being dark since 1968. I must say, the Hudson is one of the most beautiful, but also the most comfortable theater on Broadway, for sure. The Imperial Theater. The Imperial is probably the luckiest theater on Broadway. Besides more recent long-running hits like Billy Elliot or Les Miserables, from 1938 to 1968, only 2 shows that played the Imperial ran fewer than 300 performances. The James Earl Jones Theater. Another recently renamed theater, the proscenium arch of the Court Theater, as it was originally named, was constructed in perforated plaster and was treated with art glass, enabling it to be lit during performances. This lighting feature hadn't been operational in decades, but when the theater went through a massive restoration in 2022, the proscenium lighting was restored as well. The John Golden Theater. The exterior of the Golden was used as the location for the movie version of A Chorus Line. It is also shown in the background during the opening scenes of All About Eve as the home of Margot Channing's Aged in Wood. The Lena Horne Theater. Like many of the Broadway theaters, the recently renamed Lena Horne Theater, formerly the Brooks Atkinson, was for a time a television studio. The theater was known as CBS Studio 59 and was where the popular game shows I've Got a Secret and What's My Line were filmed. The Longacre Theater. The Longacre Theater was built by impresario Harry Frazee. Frazee was also known as the owner of the Boston Red Sox and sold player Babe Ruth to the Yankees, starting what came to be known as the Curse of the Bambino. Because of this curse, many Broadway producers actually avoided the Longacre as it was thought to be unlucky. The Lunt-Fontanne Theater. The Lunt-Fontanne, originally the Globe Theater, originally had quite a fantastical design element. The theater's ceiling, as well as the roof 20 feet above it, was originally designed to retract, allowing for an open-air feel like Shakespeare's Globe Theater. The giant sliding doors and large gears are apparently still intact on the roof, though they have been sealed over with asphalt. The Lyceum Theater. Built by producer David Froman in 1903, the Lyceum, like the Belasco Theater, was built with an apartment inside. Froman's wife was acclaimed actress Margaret Illington, so Froman gave his apartment a view of the stage. There was also a small opening where Froman could wave a white handkerchief, a signal to his wife that she was overacting a little bit. The apartment is now the home of the Schubert Archive, another place I'm dying to see.
Please let me come in.
The Lyric Theater. The Lyric Theater sits on the spot once occupied by two Broadway theaters, the Apollo and the original Lyric. Elements of both theaters still stand, however, and are incorporated into the design for the Lyric. For example, you enter the theater through the original Lyric facade, both on 43rd and 42nd Streets. Inside the theater, the dome overhead is also from the original Lyric, and the proscenium arch is the original from the Apollo Theater. The Majestic Theater. The Majestic was built in 1927 as part of a three-theater complex. The original intent was to have a large theater, the Majestic, a medium-sized theater, the Jacobs, and a small theater, the Golden, so that productions could be moved around to any of the sizes depending on ticket sales. As such, the three theaters actually share a backstage alley. The Majestic, of course, was the longtime home of the Phantom of the Opera, and since its closing, the theater has gotten a much-needed sprucing up, and so far it's looking beautiful. The Marquis Theater. In order to build the Marriott Marquis Theater, 5 other theaters had to be demolished. The original Helen Hayes, the Bijou, the Morosco, the Astor, and the Gaiety. The decision brought about an uproar from the theater community, and several actors even chained themselves to the theaters to prevent the demolition. It didn't work, obviously, but in an attempt to smooth things over, the developers of the new hotel agreed to build a new state-of-the-art theater, and thus the Marquis was born. I would actually love to do a full documentary on the theater massacre of those 5 theaters, so let me know if you want to see that video. The Minskoff Theater. Currently home to Disney's The Lion King, the Minskoff Theater is technically located on the 3rd floor of 1 Astor Place. The theater is built on the former site of the famous Astor Hotel. The Music Box Theater. In 1919, legendary producer Sam H. Harris had a proposition for Red Hot writer Irving Berlin. If Berlin came up with a new Broadway revue, Harris would build a new theater to house it. Not long after, Berlin presented Harris with the idea for the Music Box Revue, and, good on his word, the Music Box Theater was built. The Nederlander Theater. Most Broadway buffs know that the Times Square Church resides in the former Broadway theater, the Mark Hellinger. But I'll wager most don't know that the Hellinger was not the church's first Broadway home. The Nederlander Theater was home to the Times Square Church from 1987 to 1989 until the Nederlanders made the horrible decision to sell them the Hellinger.
Give it back.
The Neil Simon Theater. The Neil Simon was originally named the Alvin Theater. Built by producing partners Alex Ahrens and Vinton Friedley, the name Alvin Theater came from the Al in Alex and the Vin in Vinton. The New Amsterdam Theater. The magnificent New Amsterdam Theater was, in the 1980s, in shambles. The interior was completely flooded, it had been looted, and was literally crumbling. The Disney organization bought the theater and spent a reported $34 million to renovate it to its former glory, and it is truly one of the most beautiful theaters on Broadway. The Palace Theater. The Palace Theater is about to reopen after going through what has to be the most beguiling transformation in Broadway theater history. Located at the corner of 47th and Broadway, right in the heart of Times Square, the Palace Theater, once the mecca of vaudeville and home to musicals like Sweet Charity and Beauty and the Beast, was raised intact 30 feet in the air to its new 3rd-story location. Below the theater will be, what else, shops and stuff, but they just released our first look inside the theater itself, and I have to say, it looks beautiful, so whatever makes them happy and rich, I guess. At least the theater's still standing. The Richard Rodgers Theater. The Richard Rodgers holds the record for housing the most number of shows that have won either Best Play or Best Musical at the Tony Awards. 9 musicals and 2 plays for a total of 11. The Samuel J. Friedman Theater. The movie The Muppets Take Manhattan featured the Friedman, then named to Biltmore, as the theater where the Muppets debut their Broadway show Manhattan Melodies. The Sam S. Schubert Theater. Before the Tony Awards were more commonly presented at Radio City Music Hall, or more recently the Beacon Theater, they used to be presented at different Broadway theaters themselves. The Schubert Theater hosted the Tonys the most times, with 8 broadcasts. The Stephen Sondheim Theater. Well, most people think of the 1998 Alan Cumming-led revival of Cabaret playing Studio 54, it actually started at the Henry Miller's Theater, the theater's original name. But when a crane collapsed next door, the city shut down the street and subsequently the show. After scrambling to find a new venue, Studio 54 was procured and Roundabout has been there ever since. The St. James Theater. The St. James was actually built on the site of the original Sardi's restaurant. When theatrical titan A.L. Erlanger wanted the space to build a new theater, Vincent Sardi simply moved up the street to the location it's now in. Studio 54. Before the Roundabout Theater Company leased and eventually purchased the venue, the once famous nightclub was set to be torn down in 1996 by the owner's Allied Partners and be replaced with a virtual reality gaming venue called the Cyberdome. So glad it became a theater. The Todd Hames Theater. This theater, right on 42nd Street, recently changed from the American Airlines Theater to the Todd Hames Theater to recognize the great Todd Hames, Roundabout Theater Company's longtime leader who passed away last year. Before it was acquired by Roundabout in the early 2000s, the Selwyn Theater, as it was originally called when built, was for a time the Times Square Visitor Center. The Vivian Beaumont Theater. While the theater, owned and operated as part of Lincoln Center, is a newer theater compared to most Broadway houses, the space does have a theatrical past that predates the theater itself. The area that would eventually become Lincoln Center and the Vivian Beaumont originally contained a lot of basketball courts, the same ones that were used in the filming of the film version of West Side Story in 1961.
But we're having such fun.
We enjoy the playground.
See, it keeps us deprived children off of the foul city streets.
Shut up!
The Walter Kerr Theater. The Kerr, named after beloved critic and author Walter Kerr, was originally named the Ritz Theater, but not all of its ritzy past is gone. If you look at the theater's marquee, you'll notice a stark difference in fonts between the and theater and Walter Kerr. After the name change, to save money of course, only the Ritz part was removed from the Ritz Theater. The original marquee was quite elaborate and therefore expensive, so a more standard Walter Kerr was added, with the elaborate the and theater left in its place. The Winter Garden Theater. The Winter Garden Theater is the only Broadway theater whose structure was not originally intended to be a theater. The structure was originally built in 1896 as the New York Horse Exchange and Stables. It wasn't until 1911 that the Schuberts bought the space and redesigned it as a theater. It was even said that when the theater went through massive renovations after Cats ended its record run, the crew members found traces of hay deep in the floorboards. And that is 41 facts about the 41 Broadway theaters. Okay, well, there was probably a lot more than 41 facts in there, you know. If you want even more information on the Broadway theaters, again, let me know in the comments. It's truly one of the only ways to tell me you like this kind of content. The other way is giving this video a like and sharing it with the theater nerd in your life. It helps out so much. A big shout out to my patrons over at Patreon. I love you all dearly. By the time this video is released, I should be at work on my next Broadway breakdown, so hopefully it won't be too long before you see me again. It's going to be a fun breakdown, I think. A little hint, it was a big flop starring an acclaimed actress in her only musical role. There's actually a few shows that fit that description, but we'll see if you can guess the right one. Make sure you follow me on the socials at bwayghostlight, of course. But until next time, this is Broadway by Ghostlight. I'm Mark Bonanni. Thanks for watching.